Welcome back to Sociology 227. This is Mol and Law Video 1. This video is going to be about actor network theory. To begin with, I'm going to tell you about Bruno Latour, the most famous sociologist from the actor network theory tradition. Next, I want to tell you about how Bruno Latour explores science and technology through that perspective. This will get you ready to do the readings. Let's do it. The basic unit of actor network theory is the so-called actor network. This is any entity that exists based on the internal relation of its components. Any actor network, or any thing in this viewpoint, is an emergent outcome of socio-material relations. It exists when stuff comes together. This is very important. For Latour, the forces that hold material things together and the forces that hold social things together are in fact the same. There is no distinction between that which holds my cane together from that which holds a marriage together. Both involve actors working to maintain existence. Latour, and others who think like him, argue that the actor network is a site of distributed agency. Agency, here, is not simply an attribute that humans have, but rather is expressed in every single actor network. So long as you have parts coordinating to establish a particular state of affairs, you have action, you have agency, and you have the social. The point is that agency isn't simply a human property. Latour will tell us we cannot form society with the social alone. Latour is arguing that any set of durable relations, my cane, my relationship, my body, is an outcome of various forces that align for a period of time. The sociologist's goal is to explore all of the various components that make up a state of affairs. It is a sociology of associations rather than of social facts. What can be associated? Anything. Not just humans, but non-humans too. Finally, for Latour, the term actor network refers to both individuals and groups at the same time. A single human body is also a compound of organs, dwelling in an environment, at once a unity and a multiplicity. SOCY 227 is a collection of parts, students, computers, TAs, video material, but they come together to form a particular whole. So just think of the course like you would the molecule-shaped thing up there on the slide. To repeat, anything, so long as it exists and maintains a state of affairs, is an actor network. They make up the world, and they are made, potentially, out of all sorts of things. The point of sociology is to follow them around, to follow agents as they act and are acted on. So, who's this Bruno Latour guy? Latour is most famous for actor network theory, but also for being a pioneering thinker in the social study of science. Just as we talked about drugs and drug use, the sociology of science and technology does not aim to simply repeat the work done in the sciences, but look to the social. The sociology of science and technology is interested in how particular scientific controversies are organized, how they are closed, how we constitute social order in the laboratory, and how scientific cultures take shape. The goal then is to follow scientists around as they produce scientific truths and how they argue about the validity of those truths. The sociology of science and technology is very different than the philosophy of science. In the philosophy of science, the goal is to chart the logical conditions on which we take something to be true or pseudoscience, etc. A key philosophy of science question is something like, are atoms real? This is not the kind of question that sociologists of science and technology ask. They would ask questions like, how do we know that atoms are real? What were the material conditions through which we've come to know this? Who benefits from their reality? So whereas the philosophy of science is asking logical questions, the sociology of science and technology is asking empirical ones. Bruno Latour's work, as we shall see, was crucial in establishing the sociological wing of science and technology studies. Here I've identified two of Latour's most famous books. I'll talk about laboratory life later. His We Have Never Been Modern is a short and sweet book with a relatively simple argument. The typical dividing line between sociology and anthropology is that sociologists study advanced industrial societies, whereas anthropologists study primitive ones. Note the quotation marks. In advanced societies, the story goes, we have a division between what is natural, science, and what is cultural, society, what is objective and true outside of us, and subjective and true only in our beliefs. One can take Durkheim's analysis of solidarity as an example of this. Anthropologists, on the other hand, are supposed to study simple societies that do not have these divisions. Latour says this whole thing is baloney. If you study our supposedly more advanced institutions, like that of science, you see that the same sort of structures exist as they did in the pre-modern world. Quotation marks again. The point, if the modern world is made of the divisions between the scientific and the social, and the subjective from the objective, then we've never been modern at all. So the argument is that we can follow scientific fact production around just like we can study any other kind of culture. Latour's most famous book, the one that made him the sociologist of science and technology, was Laboratory Life. I know, it's old, even older than me. But the points that Latour makes in the piece are really important for the arguments that Latour will make about sociology, about the role of socio-material entities in shaping our non-modern world, and about the cultural organization of scientific practice. The book first came out in 1979, even before I came out, but a very important change happened between the first and second edition of the book. The first version discussed the social construction of scientific facts, looking to the laboratory of Nobel Prize winner Roger Guillemin studying brain hormones at the Salk Institute in California. The second edition of the book dropped the subtitle, simply emphasizing the construction of scientific facts. Why? Well, as I emphasized in my lectures on Judith Butler, to say that science is socially constructed doesn't mean much. What matters is how. In Laboratory Life, and throughout his career, Latour will emphasize that scientific practice cannot be divorced from its material production. If we want to know what science is, we have to follow scientists around and see what they do. The scientific laboratory would become the prototypical actor network. That is, it is a singular site of investigation, with an address, and a single workplace with employees, but also an ecosystem distributing action. And, this is the radical part of Latour's argument, constituting facts about nature. Here, Latour is very close to the work of Harold Garfinkel and other sociologists interested in the production of a stable social order. Only the argument is more radical. It is not just social, but natural order that is shaped and deployed. This is a radical argument. The belief is that science doesn't discover truths about nature out there. Science produces them. Here I've outlined the basics of Latour's approach to the laboratory as a site of truth-making. The first element is the emphasis on empirical observation. To know how scientific laboratories operate, we need to be there and watch the flows of materials, money, energy, and papers as they come in and leave the lab. Just like how you would stake out a criminal operation to watch how crimes are committed, Latour staked out the Salk Institute and watched the flow of materials through the laboratory setting. Just as you have to prove that a crime is being committed, or not, Latour argued that the key job of the scientific lab is to prove that science has been committed or not. They do so by mobilizing resources. Latour argues that mapping the mechanisms of scientific production means following around inscriptions. This is important. An inscription can be taken literally. Any piece of data that can be removed from one setting and introduced into another. So if you go to the store and you get a receipt, you have an inscription. If you run a regression analysis, you get an inscription. If you submit a paper, you get an inscription. Inscription, inscription, inscription. In the case of the scientific lab, the goal is to inscribe the characteristics of the natural order of things. We actively enroll the agency of things via these inscriptions to tell us about the powers of things to act as we say they do. So scientific fact production involves the mobilization of inscriptions to prove particular arguments about the way that nature exists. Let's look to an example to make sense of Latour's concept of trials of strength, moments where scientists mobilize contrasting accounts of nature. Let's say your friend McKeely has a particularly terrible boyfriend. He doesn't have a job, he's a philosophy/sociology double major, so we know he won't even ever have one. And he texts you at 3:12 a.m. after #stage rage and a Bubba's poutine that he made her pay for, looking for some early morning romance. Okay, so how do we prove that her boyfriend is a snake? Screenshots. I'm too old to use an electronic mobile telephone handset properly, but even I know you can take a picture of the messages screen and show McKeely that her boyfriend is trash. This is exactly the same thing that Latour is talking about when he talks about inscription devices and trials of strength. Just as we would use this screenshot, a readout demonstrating the fact that Karl Marx is a scoundrel, Latour links this back to the evidence behind scientific controversies. We don't find out the nature of things by nature alone, but in the way we mobilize inscriptions and other socio-technical devices in service of that investigation. If we want to look at any particular social act, any example of power, authority, or inequality, we have to look to the ways that non-human devices support social action. In this case, pointing out how much of a piece of trash Uncle Carl is. Make sense? A screenshot is an inscription, and we mobilize it to win the fight over Carl's shadiness. To return to Latour. How do we study scientists? We follow them around. What do scientists actually do? They inscribe things. How do we know that something is true? It resists our attempts to dispute it. This is the basis of actor network theory. Socio-material assemblies that produce stable scientific facts. Whereas initially, Bruno Latour is looking to scientific fact production, now he looks to social order. Latour's work represents both a challenge to the infallibility of scientific knowledge, but also to the practice of sociology. This is where we'll turn next. Here I'll focus on three major challenges to sociology. In contrast to Durkheim's social science, Latour argues that the only way that particular assemblies maintain their order is through actor networks. You can't divide the social from the material any more than you can divide the natural from the social parts of the classroom. They always must work in tandem in various forms of association. Social facts don't exist away from all the material elements that make up society. They are always acting in concert. If the goal of sociology is to follow action around, you must look to the way that non-humans act. While it is very often humans who translate action and enroll material allies, that doesn't mean action resides in the human world alone. Secondly, Latour is arguing through his analysis of the laboratory that politics and science are not distinct. Both of them are about struggles for power and truth. We recruit political allies in the same way as we recruit scientific ones. If we fail to understand the political nature of knowledge cultivation, the basis of all scientific knowledge, then we aren't paying attention. Finally, and I've already emphasized this, agency is not restricted to the exercise of human subjects. Agency doesn't equal will, it just equals any association of things that impacts the world. Rivers act on a sawmill in the same way as you can wind up a watch. In both cases, there is a form of action. Just because we don't call it that doesn't mean it isn't the case. While their components differ, while they are made up of different stuff, that they are acting does not. Of course, the traditional sociologist will reply to each of these challenges. First, is it true that all social order is ultimately made permanent by material elements? Secondly, Is the only thing that makes something true the fact that we can't object to it anymore? Finally, what about meaning? Is human meaning just a translation of agency in human-like networks? Or is there something more to the way that we think and act and feel that doesn't find any corollary in the non-human? What makes us, us? Now you can go and do the readings. As you go through them, think about how agency is distributed between human and non-human components. See you in the next video.